Your yard may already be changing. Not next month. Not next week. Right now. And the strange thing is, the birds probably noticed it before you did. The feeder can still be full. The grass can still be green. The flowers can still be blooming. Everything can appear perfectly normal. Yet somehow, the birds begin spending less time there. The visits become shorter. The songs become less frequent. The activity starts to fade. Most people don't notice these changes at first. They only notice what comes later. The quiet feeder, the empty branches, the feeling that something is missing. And when that happens, most people assume they know why. Maybe the birds migrated. Maybe a predator moved into the area. Maybe the weather changed. Maybe the birds found a better yard. All of those explanations sound reasonable. Sometimes, they're even true, but surprisingly often, they miss something much closer to home. Because before birds abandon a place, before they stop feeding, before they stop singing, they often begin responding to changes that humans haven't noticed yet. That is what makes birds so fascinating. They don't experience a yard the way we do. Humans see flowers. Birds see food sources. Humans see trees. Birds see shelter. Humans see a quiet lawn. Birds see an entire ecosystem. Every insect, every seed, every source of water, every place where life is either increasing or disappearing. And because their survival depends on it, birds are constantly paying attention, far more attention than most people realize. Researchers who study bird behavior have long observed that birds often respond to environmental shifts weeks before those changes become obvious to humans. The birds become quieter, more cautious, less active, not because something has already gone wrong, because something may be starting to. The remarkable part is that the yard can still look healthy, beautiful even, yet the birds may already be gathering information that tells a different story. Information hidden in places most people never think to look. The question is, what are the birds noticing? Because whatever it is, they seem to understand it long before we do. And once you learn where they're looking, you may never see your backyard the same way again. The first thing to understand is that birds are not actually watching your yard. At least, not in the way most people imagine. They are watching the life inside it. A backyard that appears healthy to a human can feel completely different to a bird, because birds are constantly measuring things we rarely notice. The movement of insects, the availability of seeds, the activity around water, the number of feeding opportunities hidden among leaves, bark, flowers, and grass. To a bird, these are not small details. They are survival signals. And survival signals often begin changing long before a yard looks different. This is where many homeowners become confused. The flowers are still blooming. The trees are still standing. The lawn still looks green. Everything appears normal. Yet the birds seem less interested than they were a few weeks ago. According to ecologists, one reason is that birds often respond to changes at the lowest levels of an ecosystem first. Changes that humans rarely see. Imagine a backyard in early summer. Thousands of insects are moving through the environment. Tiny beetles, moths, caterpillars, spiders, pollinators. Most people never notice them, but birds do. For many species, insects are one of the most important food sources in the entire yard, especially during nesting season when young birds require protein-rich food to grow. And this is where the story becomes interesting, because insect populations can begin changing long before plants show visible signs of stress, long before leaves turn brown, long before flowers stop blooming, long before a homeowner realizes anything is different. The birds may already be responding. The feeding patterns change. The routes through the yard change. The amount of time spent searching for food increases. Visits become shorter. Activity becomes less predictable. From the kitchen window, nothing seems wrong. But from the bird's perspective, the environment may already be telling a different story. And here's the fascinating part. The birds are not necessarily detecting the problem itself. They're detecting the effects of it. A chain reaction unfolding quietly beneath the surface. A chain reaction that often starts with creatures so small that most people never think about them at all. And once those tiny signals begin disappearing, the birds notice almost immediately, which raises an even bigger question. How can birds detect a changing ecosystem weeks before humans ever realize something is wrong? The answer is surprisingly simple. Birds are not just watching the ecosystem. In many ways, they're watching the creatures that monitor the ecosystem for them, the insects. This is the hidden piece of the puzzle that most people never hear about. When scientists study environmental change, they often pay close attention to insect populations because insects respond to changes incredibly quickly. A small shift in soil moisture, a change in plant health, a reduction in native flowering plants, a new pesticide in the area. Even subtle changes in temperature can affect insect activity long before humans notice anything unusual. And birds are constantly reading those signals, not by measuring the environment directly, by observing the insects that live inside it. This is the scientific reveal behind a mystery that confuses many bird lovers. The birds are not predicting the future. They're noticing changes in the food web before humans can see the larger consequences. Imagine a healthy backyard in spring. Caterpillars are abundant. Beetles move through the grass. Pollinators drift from flower to flower. Everything appears normal. Bird activity is high. Songs are frequent. Feeding visits are consistent. Now imagine that insect activity begins declining. At first, the change is almost invisible. The flowers still bloom. The grass still grows. The trees still look healthy. To a homeowner, the yard appears exactly the same. But to a bird, the difference is obvious. Finding food requires more effort. Searching takes longer. Energy costs increase. And the environment begins feeling less reliable. The remarkable part is that birds often respond to this weeks before visible signs appear in the landscape itself. This is why ecologists sometimes refer to birds as early warning indicators, not because they possess some mysterious ability, because they are constantly collecting information from hundreds of tiny biological signals happening around them every day. The birds notice the insects. The insects notice the environment. And together, they create a chain of information that humans often enter far too late, which explains something many people have experienced. By the time you realize your yard is changing, the birds may have known for weeks. And once you understand that, the quiet feeder and the empty branches begin to tell a completely different story. The good news is that the birds were never abandoning your yard. At least, not in the way most people imagine. They weren't judging your garden. They weren't rejecting your feeder. They weren't choosing another yard because they liked it better. They were responding to information, the same way they always have. The same way birds have responded to environmental signals for millions of years. When insect activity declines, birds notice. When feeding opportunities become less reliable, birds notice. When the ecosystem begins changing, even in subtle ways, birds notice. And their behavior changes accordingly. That change is not a criticism. It's a response, a practical decision made by an animal trying to survive. This is what makes birds such remarkable observers of the natural world. They are constantly reading signals that most humans overlook. Tiny changes, small patterns, early warnings hidden inside everyday life. And because they respond so quickly, they often become the first visible sign that something in the environment is shifting. The beautiful part is that this process can work in the opposite direction too. When native plants return, when insect populations recover, when water becomes more available, when habitats become healthier, the birds notice that as well. Sometimes long before humans realize improvements are taking place. The songs become more frequent. The feeding activity increases. The visits become longer. And gradually, the yard begins to feel alive again. What seemed like a bird problem was never really a bird problem at all. It was an ecosystem story, and the birds were simply the first ones reading it. So the next time you notice fewer birds in your yard, don't just look at the feeder. Look beyond it, because the birds may be seeing something the rest of us have not noticed yet. The quiet branches, the shorter visits, the missing songs, they may not be signs that the birds are leaving. They may be signs that the birds are trying to tell you something, and once you learn how to listen, you'll never see a backyard in quite the same way again. Have you ever noticed birds changing their behavior before you notice changes in your yard? Tell us what you've seen in the comments. And if this changed how you think about bird behavior, subscribe to Backyard Bird Mind and share it with someone who loves watching birds as much as you do.